If you love classic contemporary Christian music and the people that made it, please like this video and subscribe to our channel to help support us and keep us going. Welcome to Stage Right. I am your host, John Thorne. They say if you die with a handful of friends, you die a rich man. Well, I've got several busloads full, and I'm excited to share all of them with you. Welcome to Stage Right. I am your host, John Thorne. This is episode 8. Thanks for joining me today. It's funny how in life we hear things or we're taught things that sound good at face value on the surface, but they're not necessarily 100% true. It's kind of like the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law. Take the phrase, practice makes perfect. Sounds good, but not really true. A more accurate phrase would be, perfect practice makes perfect. You can practice something 10,000 times, but if you're practicing it wrong, you may get better, but it won't be perfect. Probably not even close. It's been said that the enemy of great is very good, and I believe that. Details are something that most people ignore while pursuing greatness, yet it's often the attention to those very details that prevent the greatness people are pursuing. And yes, I did get lucky and just came up with that off the top of my head. My guest today, Denny Keitzman, is details personified. He is truly one of the best at not only his job, but he has remarkable insight on how to approach life. Denny wasn't the first guest I booked for the podcast, but he was the first guest to ask for a list of things we were going to talk about because preparation is his requirement. I love that about him. He lives out in the hills of Tennessee and doesn't have cell reception at his house, so we made definitive plans on when he would drive into the small town 10 miles from his house, what time we would talk, and who would call who. It made me smile as we planned this call because it reminded me of why all of us who toured and worked with Denny love him so much. Now a quick word from our sponsor.
Hey Rockstar provides digital marketing software and services to generate more leads, more exposure, and more revenue for your business or organization. Let Hey Rockstar amplify your awesomeness.
You're in for a treat today, so grab your popcorn, hop in your favorite chair, and enjoy my conversation with my great friend Denny Keitzman. So you and I met at Creation Festival in 1990. I was playing for Margaret Becker, and we had driven up in her van with a trailer behind it. And when we got to the festival, we pulled all the gear out of the trailer and we're setting it up on the stage. And one of the crew guys came over to me and said, "You see that guy right there? You don't want to make him mad. Do whatever he tells you to do." And I laughed and thought to myself, oh, he's the guy in charge.
Exactly.
Which means he has to keep this circus synced up with the clock to make sure this 4-day festival doesn't turn into 9 days.
Well, I have a Bible verse actually that I kind of actually 2 or 3 Bible verses that I kind of ran things with, and one of them was the horse is prepared for the day of battle, but the victory rests with the Lord. My job was to prepare the horse.
Yep.
Okay, and then another one was it's the little foxes that steal the vine.
Yep.
So if you let little things get away, pretty soon you're running an hour and a half, 2 hours late. And so I just never let anything get away. Ran literally everything with a stopwatch, sound checks, whatever. Everything was down to the second or to the minute at least. And we'd start on time, we'd end on time.
Right. And that's why people loved you, because even though it was painful for them, it was the first time they were probably held accountable or held to a clock. But the reality is everything went smoothly because you were in charge.
Well, a lot of times I had to say things that were not necessarily pleasant for the artist to hear or the artist manager who might happen to be with them. But trust me, it was for their own good.
Right. Right. And the good of the festival.
Yeah. When you're playing a festival is, think of it as a mosaic or a jigsaw puzzle or whatever. And that artist or that band is just one piece of the puzzle. And you can't be bigger than what your piece is supposed to be. You can't be smaller than what your piece is supposed to be. You have to fit right in to make this thing look like the picture
Right.
that the owner of the festival wants it to look like. And every festival has its own personality. And so, working for several festivals over the years, I had to, one of the first things I would ask somebody when they call me up and say, hey, can you do my festival? I'd say, well, what are your goals? What do you want to accomplish with this thing? And I get, a certain amount of answers that would be expected.
Right.
And then every once in a while, but I'd pry a little bit and I'd say, well, no, really, what do you really want to accomplish? I mean, do you want to make the bands happy? Do you want to make the thing start on time, end on time? What is important to you? And, I'd get different answers from different festival owners or festival promoters or whatever you want to call them. But then I would have to cater and change my approach, or at least some of my approach, to match their goals.
Right. It's interesting you would use the analogy of a mosaic or a jigsaw puzzle piece, because look back over the years that you did festivals, how many bands showed up and they acted like, okay, so they had 3 gigs all summer and they would show up and act like sound check was their rehearsal time because they hadn't rehearsed in weeks and they thought they had all day and it was just their show.
Well, how about this? Or a solo artist who made a career as a solo artist, maybe singing to tracks or whatever, and then all of a sudden they get booked on the main stage at a festival. So all of a sudden they throw together a band.
Yep.
Somebody thinks that's a good idea.
Right.
And they've never really played before together. They may have rehearsed a little bit, at Nashville or wherever they're from, but really, they really hadn't really played together. They didn't know each other. They didn't really, lock in sync, as a band has to do.
Yep.
And then they come to the festival and think that the sound check was a rehearsal.
Right.
And no, you got 20 minutes. Clock started.
Yeah, and if you go beyond 20 minutes, it comes out of your show time.
Exactly. Or out of your butt. Well, something's gonna get bit.
Right. Right. All right. So let me put the festival talk on hold for just a minute and let's go back. Give everyone that's listening a little bit of insight into who you are. Tell everyone where you grew up and your church background, that kind of thing.
Well, let's see. I was born in Akron, Ohio. My father was a salesman. We moved around a lot and lived in Michigan, lived back in Ohio again. My parents became Christians when I was 12 and got involved in a very, 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 underline all those varies, conservative church that playing on a high school sport team was an unequal yoke together with unbelievers.
Right.
And here I am, a big guy. I want to play football. I want to play, sports. My dad played football for Michigan State. And so my parents never really put that down on me, but it was definitely frowned upon
Right.
by the church if you were involved in that sort of stuff. But the good part about it was they had church 4 times a week. And if they had something special come up, they just added another day. They didn't replace something.
Right.
They just added more time. And so from the time of 12 years old until I left home, I got the King James Bible almost memorized,
Right.
for lack of a better term. At least it got poured into me.
Right.
And even though my life, to be quite honest with you, was a complete opposite direction,
Mm-hmm.
as I got into my teen years, I just, I was just off doing whatever I wanted to do.
Right.
But I was still going to church 4 times a week because I lived at home with my folks.
Right.
Until I'm going to tell you something you probably don't know about me, but I got a girl pregnant. I was a lifeguard. She was a little girl in a bikini out at where I lifeguarded, and I got her pregnant. But in those days, you did the honorable thing.
Right.
You either married her or she went off to Iowa to stay with her aunt or whatever until she
Right.
had the baby and
Right.
put up for adoption or whatever she did. But so my dad always taught me, he said, you make your bed, you better lay in it.
Right.
So, okay, fine. So we got married. I didn't love her. I'd already broken up with her
Hmm.
and had a son. And at any rate, I was still going out to bars and carousing around and whatever.
Right.
And she ultimately divorced me and had every biblical right to do so because I was not a nice man.
Hmm.
I mean, I was nice to her.
Yeah.
I didn't hit her. I didn't argue. You know, if we started to argue, I just would leave the house. I wouldn't even invest the time to argue.
Right.
But that kind of blew my cover with my parents in
Hmm.
the church. Okay, and so I basically left home, got married. She divorced me, and I just kept on going down that road
Hmm.
until I was 29 and a half years old.
Wow.
And at 29 and a half years old, I'm in my second marriage by this time.
Okay.
And I have a daughter 3 years old,
Hmm.
and series of circumstances that caused me to stop and evaluate my life, i.e., I was sitting in jail for sales of marijuana,
Wow.
and my wife was in a cell across the hall, and our
Oh.
3-year-old daughter was at the babysitter's who had no idea where we were,
Hmm.
and reality crashed all around me. That's all I
Wow.
can say. It was just like, boom,
Right.
and I began to remember things that I learned when I went to church, but I didn't want to go there. I really didn't want to.
Right.
But I got bonded out the next day. I had enough money to get myself bonded out, got my wife bonded out. But God was really working on me, and he said, if you think you're in trouble now, you just ignore this,
Hmm.
and you'll find out what trouble's all about. So I had a Bible that I had when I went to church with my folks, kept it in my underwear drawer, never read it, wouldn't throw it away, kept it in my underwear drawer for one reason, and that was if I could see the Bible, I better do the laundry.
Hmm.
I got bonded out, and this thing kept eating at me like a little Pac-Man, just chomp, 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 chomp. You think you're in trouble? Just let it coast.
Right.
So I got that Bible out. I packed a lunch. I rolled 3 joints. I got on a 10-speed bicycle that I had. I rode out in the country in this little town that we lived, Adrian, Michigan, and sat underneath a tree in the middle of a farmer's field in May. It was in May. He plowed the field, but there was a grassy spot near the base of this big oak tree where he couldn't get close enough to plow, so it was like a little park. And I sat there, and from 8 in the morning until about 4:30 in the afternoon, I hollered, cried, prayed, kicked the ground, beat the tree, shook my fist at God. He probably shook his at me a couple times, and basically came to a very, very simple conclusion. For the best possible results, use the manufacturer's recommended procedures.
Right.
I'm going, duh. Yeah, I don't care. I don't care what you have, what you buy. The manufacturer knows exactly how it's supposed to work,
Right.
how to do preventive maintenance, how to, make things just as smooth as possible. So I said, okay, if you're the manufacturer and I'm the product, where are the manufacturer's recommended procedures? Because I'm certainly not getting it. I'm looking at going to prison. I'm in my second marriage. She wasn't particularly happy with me because of all this. And, my parents had pretty much disowned me. Don't call us, we'll call you. So, my life was basically a pile of crap. And just as clear as I could say, God said, well, you got the Bible right there. That's the book. And so I opened it up, and I just cracked it. I just cracked it to the middle. And, of course, if you know anything about the Bible, you crack it to the middle, you're in Psalms.
Hmm.
Because that's where that book is, in the middle of the Bible. And I just looked down, and it said, show me thy ways, O Lord. Teach me thy paths. For thou art the God of my salvation, on thee will I call all the day. And I freaked out because that's just what I got done praying. I said, if you're the manufacturer and I'm the product, where are the manufacturer's recommended procedures? I don't want to know what old brother so-and-so said, or pastor so-and-so, or my mom or dad or anybody else. You wrote the book. What do you want me to do? I was serious. If it was stand on my head and, spit Twinkies, I'd have done it.
Right.
And basically I said, okay, you're going to take over then. You're going to drive from now on. And what I found out when I started reading the Bible for myself on a regular basis was that there was a whole lot of things that I thought were in the Bible that I couldn't really find.
Right.
That I've been taught, about, don't play cards, don't dance,
Right.
don't, play on a baseball team or whatever.
Right.
But then there was a lot of things in the Bible that nobody ever told me about. Things like bring every thought captive to the obedience of Christ,
Mm-hmm.
and have in readiness to revenge all disobedience. So we're basically talking about thought control.
Right.
You're to bring every seed thought, because if you stop and think about it, every action that you do or I do starts at some point with a seed thought,
Right.
a tiny little thought that if left, it could be a good thought, could be a bad thought, but let's assume that it's a bad thought. And if you leave it unattended, what will happen is that thing will become a hairline crack. Then the next thing you know, it's a little deeper crevice. The next thing you know is you're standing on the other side of the Grand Canyon and you don't know how you got there.
Right.
All because you didn't take care of those things when they were first brought up to you.
Right.
So anyway, I just learned so much, and after I read through Psalms, was the first thing I read through, and I'm going like, oh, okay, this guy's not doing too good, but he seems to be happy about it.
Right. I've never heard it put that way, dude. That is awesome.
And then I started reading. Of course, the next book is Proverbs. I got into Proverbs, and it flipped me out, because basically Proverbs is a lot of these little one-liners.
Right.
A wise man does this, a foolish man does that, kind of stuff.
Kind of black and white there.
Yeah, and I'm going like, holy cow, no wonder I'm having such a hard time. I've been doing all the foolish man stuff. So I have just made it my business to attempt at least to do all the wise men things that God points out. And I read a chapter of Proverbs every day, and I have for the last probably 50 years. And sometimes I just read Proverbs, and then sometimes I'll read another chapter or two somewhere else in the Bible. But every day, that's the way I started.
Now, did you stay involved in the old church? Did you go back to the old church, or did you find a new church to attend?
No, but by this time I'm living in a different town.
Okay.
And a little town of Adrian, Michigan. And here's the really crazy thing: is the people we bought a house in a little subdivision, and the people across the street were always really, really, really nice to us. They had a daughter the same age as my daughter. They played together. They would babysit for our daughter if we had somewhere to go. And I knew they were Christians because every Wednesday they'd pull out of their driveway, and if I'm sitting out on the front porch, they'd wave, and I'd see them Sunday morning and Sunday night and whatever. But they never said anything about that stuff. They just loved us. That's all I can tell you.
Right.
And one day, before we got arrested, they asked us to go. Only time they ever asked us to do anything, they were taking a church group to hear an evangelist in Detroit. And I'm going like, okay, well, they've never asked us to do anything else. Let's go. Let's just honor them and go. And so we did. And because I had an intellectual acceptance of facts and data about the Bible based on my upbringing, I sat there and picked the guy's sermon apart. Okay. I really couldn't say much about his sermon, but he was asking for money every 15 minutes.
Right.
And that just turned me right off. And plus the fact the people on this bus, I'm wearing, you gotta picture this. This is in the 60s. Okay. I'm wearing, great big bell-bottom pants with platform shoes. I have a pink ruffle front tuxedo shirt,
nice,
open at the collar,
right on.
with a turquoise brooch around my neck, and a purple velvet double-breasted blazer.
Oh my goodness.
That's how I'm dressed. I'm looking like a pimp.
You were dressed for church.
That was getting dressed up for me.
Well,
And
and that was a style in the 60s.
yeah, I mean, that was a style, but there wasn't anybody on that bus that looked anything like me. Let's just put it that way. And they sang choruses all the way from Adrian, Michigan to Detroit. The song leader of the church got up in front of the bus and they led choruses and sang choruses. Now, some of them I actually knew.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, if there was something I knew, we'd sing along. I'd sing along. I don't think my wife did. She didn't know anything about anything. Let me back up to that under the tree moment.
Absolutely.
I get back on my bicycle after I've given my life to Christ. Didn't know what that really meant, but I just, you know, here, you take over, you drive, you know, you be the God of the Bible.
Right.
And I'll read it and try and figure it out. Well, I didn't get 2 pedals on my bicycle on the way home when a little thing whispered in my ear and said, "What are you going to tell your wife?" She was really upset with me in the first place. And now I'm going to go home and tell her I just gave my life to Jesus. She's going to say, "Well, that's one weird thing too many, buddy. I'm out of here." And so what I did was I got home, walked in the front door, and we had a living room that went into a dining room, and then off the dining room was the kitchen. And she was in the kitchen working, and all I did was basically just step inside the door, because if she started throwing things, I didn't want to have too far to run. So I called her. She came out. She said, "What?" And I said, "I just want you to know, I don't know what it means, but I just gave my life to Jesus Christ."
Wow.
And kind of braced myself for an onslaught, to be honest with you.
Right.
Verbal or physical, one or the other, or both. And instead, she just stood there, and all of a sudden tears came to her eyes, and she said, "That's what I want to do too."
Oh, that's awesome.
And so, like 2 little kids, we went over, knelt down in front of the couch, and we just prayed, and we said, "Lord, we don't even know what we're getting into. We're not doing this to get us out of trouble. I just want you to put our feet on solid ground, and we want you to see us through everything. And we just want to change, and because I want to do it the way the manufacturer wants to do it."
Right.
And had no idea at that moment what that really meant. But that base of commitment is what allowed me, as a tour manager, when I would see artists that were starting to wander off the path, so to speak, that you know, their egos were getting the better of them, or they were, you know, doing things that I knew. Hey, listen, I've been down that road. I know where that goes.
Right.
And you need to maybe reconsider what you're doing here. So, at any rate, that helped me a lot in my tour management days and production managing festivals, because when you come onto a stage that I'm running, it is not a democracy.
Right.
It's my stage. And I don't say that from an ego standpoint. It's just that somebody has to be in charge.
Right.
Somebody has to have the ability to say, "No, you can't do that," or, "Yeah, we can try to work that out for you." But I would try to do most of that kind of negotiating in the advancing over the phone.
Right.
Before they ever got there. Because by the time they get there, it's too late.
Let them know what to expect.
Yeah. And like you said earlier on, bands would go to the festival and they'd say, "Well, you know, Denny Keitzman is working this one. We can do this or we can't do that."
Right.
We might as well not even ask, you know.
Yep.
And every band comes with their own agenda. But again, that's where I had to, you know, say, "Okay, well, maybe we can help you accomplish having all these set pieces, or maybe we can't."
Right.
You know, because I've got time constraints, I've got crew constraints, I've got space constraints. You know, it's not like I'm working on a stage that's as big as All Outdoors.
Right.
I mean, if you went to Bonnaroo, their backstage is as big as their front stage.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't have that blessing. I had a stage that was maybe, you know, 60 or 80 feet wide and, you know, 40 feet deep, and that's it.
Right.
With wings, you know, and one of the wings would be taken up with Monitor World, and the other wing would be where you'd load bands in and out of.
Right.
So I just had to, figure, and I didn't have anybody to teach me. That was a crazy thing. I got thrown into this thing. Probably the Creation Festival was home for me for many years. I did it for 30 years.
Wow.
And I knew the guys who started Creation before they started Creation.
Oh, cool.
Tim Landis and Harry Thomas were friends of mine, and we were at a convention for an organization called the FCCM, the Fellowship of Contemporary Christian Ministries, which basically hubbed around music. But you could have been a jail and prison ministry, you could have been a coffee house, you could have been a street preacher. It didn't really matter. But it was a radio show. Christian radio was just starting to pop up in those days.
Right.
This is the early 70s and 73, thereabouts. They said, hey, we're going to start a festival next year in Pennsylvania. I said, well, that's cool. I said, what's it going to be like? He said, well, we're going to have this stage out in the middle of this field, and we're going to have several bands come in and play, and we're going to have some speakers, and, we're just going to see if it works. I said, well, that's cool. I said, by this time, my wife and I were the youth leaders at our church. And, oh, by the way, I got to back up a little bit. When my second wife, gave her life to Christ, 4 months later, she died.
Oh, my goodness.
Completely she had a kidney stone. This is before they could break them up with ultrasound or whatever they do.
Right.
They had to go in and cut it out.
Okay.
Well, a blood clot formed and lodged itself in the base of her brain, shut it off like a water faucet, and she died.
Oh, my goodness.
Boom. Here I was, a young Christian, about 4 months old as a Christian, have a little girl that I didn't know really how to take care of. And we had started going to this church with our people across the street,
right.
Little Free Methodist church.
Right.
At any rate, it was like the rug got pulled out from underneath me.
Of course.
I said, well, God, I thought we were doing it right. Is this the way you pay off? And he said, wait a second, time out. Didn't you tell me that your life was a pile of crap and that I had total control now?
Oh, wow.
Are you taking that back? No, sir. No, sir, I am not. I don't like what's going on, but I'm going to have to trust you. And John, I could fill up probably 3 or 4 pages of a legal pad of what I know that God has accomplished by making that one simple move.
Oh, wow.
I still miss my wife. I've since remarried, third wife now, who I met at a Christian conference. And I was really not even looking for anybody.
Right.
I figured that if God allowed my wife to die for whatever reason, that probably being married was not part of what he had for me. So I didn't know what, am I going to be a missionary in Bora Bora? I don't know. Was not involved in the music scene at all at that point. But some friends of mine started, who became Christians the same summer I did. I became a Christian in the spring. They became Christians in the summer. They wanted to start a Christian coffee house. And so I said, well, okay, that sounds interesting. What are you doing? Well, we're meeting every week, and we'd like you to come to the meetings. So I started meeting with them, and they had some excitement and enthusiasm and whatever.
Right.
But they didn't really know what they were doing or how to do it or how to go about it. Well,
call Denny.
Come to find out, they invited me to the meeting because they wanted me to be the director of it. I'm going like, well, I was thinking about setting up chairs or something when I said I'd help you out.
Right.
I'll do this, but you need to immediately begin to look for my replacement because I'm not sure this is what God wants me to do long term.
Right.
But I said we need to get organized and find out what really works and what doesn't work, and then pray about it and see what God wants us to do in our little town.
Cool.
So we started going to coffee houses in Jackson, Michigan, in Fort Wayne, Indiana, different places around that we heard about where there's a coffee house. And we would sit down with their board of directors or their director of their coffee house,
right,
and pick their brains. Why are you doing it this way? What did you find out that this works? How did you find out that this works? And then we would take all those things home, and we would then pray over it and cherry pick what we thought God wanted us to do. Because just because something works in Fort Wayne doesn't mean it's going to work in Adrian, Michigan.
Right.
So everybody wanted to go down to rent a storefront. And I said, no, I think God wants us to have a plan for what we're going to do. So we literally had our operational manual completely written and published and distributed to all those involved with us before we ever had a building.
Oh, that's not surprising.
So we had a meeting where we invited a bunch of pastors and whatever, and we thought about, well, where could we have a meeting? Because if you have it over at this church,
Right.
they're not. This other group is not going to come.
Yeah.
So I mean, you're either too Baptist or you're too Pentecostal, one or the other.
Right.
So I said, you know what? Everybody likes the Salvation Army, and we had a Salvation Army Citadel, or whatever they call their organization,
Yeah.
in our town. And so I went and asked the guy, I said, can we have a meeting at your place and invite some pastors and whatever? And he said, sure, love to have you. So we did. We had the meeting. 2 pastors showed up.
Of course.
That's it.
Nice.
And me.
Right.
and our team.
Right.
And 2 pastors.
Crazy. Sounds about right.
And the guy from the Salvation Army. But I made the presentation as if it was a room full of people. And I went through what we were going to do and how we were going to do it. And I said, and our next step is to find a building. So the meeting gets over with. Everybody's getting ready to leave. The guy from the Salvation Army calls me and he said, down here with me a minute. He walks me down the hall, down some steps, opens a door into their old building. They had an old building and a new building.
Oh, no way.
And he said, you think this would work? Well, and it was 2 stories. The upstairs had a stage in it. They had taken out the pews and it was hardwood floor, and they'd put up basketball rims so kids could play basketball. And the downstairs had a fully equipped kitchen, 2 rooms, bathrooms, and then the upstairs also had an office and another meeting room.
Oh my gosh, that is so fantastic.
So I said, well, this would be great. Yeah.
It's like way more than you probably could have imagined.
Yeah. I mean, I said, well, how much rent do you want? And he said, no rent.
What?
He said, you just pay your own utilities.
No way.
Pay for your own phone bill, whatever. He said, we've already got the gas and the electric and all that stuff. We'll take care of that.
Oh, wow.
But he said, if you want to put in a phone, you pay your own phone bill.
Dude, you got the hookup.
So we had our coffee house there for 4 years in that building until that guy basically got transferred somewhere else, and the new guy wanted to do something different with the building. So they asked us to kindly move out.
Oh, wow.
And by this time, we were kind of changing our vision on what we felt God wanted us to do anyway, because it basically kind of turned into a Christian nightclub. It wasn't really an evangelistic outreach. I mean, we were doing evangelism. We were doing street concerts. We were doing concerts in the park.
Right.
We were taking bands into prisons and into juvenile homes and whatever.
Cool.
But that was all outside of that building.
Huh.
Inside of that building, we just became a nice, cozy place for people to come and,
right.
But it wasn't really evangelism.
It's most churches.
Yeah, like most churches. And so by this time, I'm working, another long story, but I'm not going to go into it, but I'm just going to tell you the end of the result. I'm working as a counselor in the same jail that I ultimately did some time in.
Oh,
and
wow.
I have the sheriff and the judge who sentenced me to jail have written me letters of support, and I was being paid by a Lutheran church that I didn't even go to.
Wow.
And they weren't particularly interested in me making little Lutherans out of people. They just wanted me to preach Christ.
Right.
And so I'm working with guys in jail and prison, probation and parole. And we were having guys get out of jail and prison and come and live at our house.
Oh, wow.
We fixed up our whole basement into a dormitory.
Huh.
And then we had a house mother that lived down there, and she kind of took care of things when we weren't there.
Right.
At any rate, there was some friends of ours who said, we really need to have a crisis pregnancy center. And that kind of really tripped my wife, because she had had an abortion in college and never, other than she knew God forgave her, but she really had to deal with that whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that became a hot button for her. So we decided to start a crisis pregnancy center.
Wow.
So moving from the coffee house into the, more working with guys getting out of jail, prison, probation, and parole, and then opening up a crisis pregnancy center, and which ended up being a maternity home,
Wow.
and then a semi-independent living program for single mothers who wanted to keep their babies.
Unbelievable.
Anyway, that's still all going on in Adrian, Michigan today.
Wow. That is so cool, Denny.
And they are, I think they celebrated the 35th anniversary.
Unreal.
Not too long ago. And so it got to the point where in the music business, I had to make a decision. Was I going to stay working with artists that I was working with by this time? I mean, I would go into jail 4 or 5 days a week and counsel guys.
Wow.
But then I would also take off and be gone for 2 or 3, 4 weeks.
Right.
And I never told anybody where I went, other than my board of directors knew where I went.
Right.
And I would take all the money that I got paid and put it into the pregnancy center.
You're kidding me.
I didn't take a salary, and I didn't keep any of the DC Talk money or the festival money or anything. I just gave it to the ministry.
Oh, wow.
Creative fundraising, because I got tired of going around asking people for money.
Right.
And, get a good pat on the back, but no money.
Yeah, like on Facebook.
So it was just easier for me to just go out and earn the money and give it to them.
That's kind of the opposite of what most people in the ministry do. They usually fundraise for themselves.
See, very few people, I mean, there's a few people in Nashville who know that story, but not many.
Right.
I mean, certainly not many, most of the bands don't know it. I mean, DC Talk knew it, because I told them, I said, so this is my background. I am the dubious instigator of 2 different head shops in the state of Michigan, the first 2 in 2 different counties in the state of Michigan, when I was involved in the whole drug thing.
Right.
And then I started producing concerts for the legalization of marijuana movement. That's how I really got into the music business. I started producing concerts for the legalization of marijuana.
Wow.
And then when I became a Christian, I said, well, I can't be doing this anymore.
Right.
So I gave it all up, thinking that the music thing was, and I didn't even keep the money. I gave the money to the band.
Of course you did.
But at any rate, make a long story short, that's what got me into it. And then the coffee house, and we had live music every Friday and Saturday night, and we started doing bigger and bigger things out in the park, but it was all evangelistic.
Yep.
And then met Harry and Tim, and they told me they were going to start Creation. Well, I went, and we took our youth group. There was like 21 kids and 6 adults, and we had several, I think 4 or 5 van loads, and we caravan from Adrian, Michigan to, at this point it was in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and not at the site that it was at in 90. They started it in this other place. But at any rate, I was so impressed with the 5,000 people that were there. Think about it. Creation started their very first year, 5,000 people.
5,000 is a lot to start a festival with.
Yeah. And I said, man, I'm going to come back next year and help you. What can I do?
Right.
They said, well, we know you've done some production stuff. Can you help our stage manager, because he's in way over his head? So I said, sure, I'll be happy to help him. I mean, I don't really know what I'm doing either at that point, but I'll be happy to help him. And so the next year I came as the assistant stage manager, and you're not going to believe this, the stage manager left.
What? No way.
He took off. He was having financial problems, marital problems. His parents lived nearby, and he went and spent the time with his parents.
Oh, my goodness.
So here I am, kind of thrown into the deep end of the pool with artists of national caliber.
Right.
And by this time, there's 10 or 15,000 people there.
Of course.
And I get thrown into the thing, and I have to make it work.
Do you remember any of the bands that were on the schedule that year you got thrown in the deep end?
Well, probably, I don't remember exactly who they were, but it would have been like Second Chapter back, Honey Tree,
cool.
Maybe Petra, that genre of bands back in the, probably Chuck Girard too.
Oh yeah, Chuck Girard.
Love Song.
Yep.
Anyway, and they didn't know me, and I didn't know them, and I had to get it done.
So over the years, did you ever end up with a contract with Creation since you started there?
Creation. I didn't have a contract with Creation. They just expected me to be there.
Right.
And you're running Creation Festival with volunteers.
Yep.
There's no paid labor.
Nope.
And so I literally built a team of volunteers that the average person who worked for me on Creation was probably anywhere from 10 to 15 years of service.
Oh my goodness, that's crazy.
And so I had such a well-oiled machine that I could almost stand back and do nothing.
You know, everybody thinks that people don't want to be told what to do, but I think people are dying to be led. And I can tell you, it would have been a dream for me, a dream to work for you.
Well, I mean, I can tell you that there are people in the industry now, full-time in the industry now, that started working for me as 14-year-olds at Creation.
Wow.
That are actually doing things like, Christian cruise ships and running the stage and running the whole thing.
Right.
And they're still doing it the same way I taught them.
Yep. Yep.
And as a matter of fact, at the height of my career, I was doing 27 festivals a summer.
27.
And there are not 27 weekends.
No, there's not.
No. So I had to, you mentioned earlier, I had to replicate myself. So what I would do is I would take some of these people that I had trained and I'd say, okay, I think you're ready to go out and handle a festival by yourself. I would do all the advancing. I would give them a book and say, here's the festival. Now you go do this one and I'll go do that one.
Wow.
And I'd go do the big ones and send them off to some of the smaller festivals and whatever. But finally my accountant said to me, you're not making any money on these. You just need to, you make money on the ones that you do, but the ones that you have to pay somebody to go to, you're just turning around and giving them the money that the festival gives you.
Right.
So why are you doing that? So I decided to pare down the number of festivals that I did to something that I could handle on my own, and or maybe take somebody with me if I had a side stage or
right.
Needed an assistant or whatever at that festival.
Yeah.
So that's what I did, and then the other ones I just pawned them off to the people that I had trained. So here, this is yours now. You go work for them.
Wow, cool.
And one of the festivals that kept asking me to come work for them, but never quite got around to really asking me, really sitting down and saying, listen, we want you to come this year.
Right.
Can you do it? Was Kingdom Bound.
Oh, wow.
I would go to Kingdom Bound with bands, with DC Talk or Stephen Curtis Chapman or whoever I was out with at the time.
Right.
And they would always say, we really need to get you to do this festival. I said, well, you got my phone number. Call me up. Well, they never would call. And then finally, I get a phone call from Fred Caserta, who was the guy who started Kingdom Bound.
Right.
And he said, okay, we're ready to do this. We want you to come next year, but you got to promise me one thing. I said, what is that, sir? And he said that you will do it yourself and not send somebody for at least 3 years.
Wow.
I said, well, okay,
Nice.
no problem there, because by this time I'm starting to cut down
Right.
on the festival. So Kingdom Bound became a festival that I really personally enjoyed for lots of different reasons. I mean, they had great catering. That's number one.
Hey, that's important.
That's really important.
Right.
And I really believe they were doing it for the right reasons. They were not in it to make money. They were just in it to preach the gospel.
Yep.
They were in it to, just get the word out.
Yep.
And it was at a permanent built stage and amphitheater
It's beautiful.
at Darien Lake theme park.
Yep.
So we didn't have to build a stage. We just walked in, loaded in our sound and lights and video wall, whatever we had, and started doing the show the next day. And it was an interesting festival. Most festivals are like maybe Wednesday night, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday.
Yep.
This one was Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday.
Yep, it was.
And the only reason that they were doing it that way is not because they wanted to, but it was a Live Nation venue.
Ah.
A Live Nation did not want to give up the weekend.
Now, see, I never knew that. I knew it was the
Yeah.
off nights, but I didn't know why.
Yeah. Live Nation did not want to give up the weekends because they wanted to bring in, whoever,
Right.
and have their own shows.
Yep.
And that particular festival is a union gig,
Yep.
Local 10 out of Buffalo.
The old good old union.
But they had compassion on the Christian festival,
which is
and
rare.
they would allow us to, if we had 10 of their guys, they would allow us to have 10 or 15 volunteers.
Oh, that's a miracle.
I mean, they would handle the load in, they would do the rigging, they would do the, whatever.
Sure.
But and because it was such a plum gig for the union, I got all the guys with seniority,
right,
which were kind of older,
right.
Didn't really move that fast, but they were good guys and they knew what they were doing, and they allowed us to have all the volunteers we wanted. And I did that festival. I would have done it this last summer, last July, except for COVID.
Right.
Thing. And when I turned 75 and I'm standing on the stage loading in production, I thought, my goodness, I'm 75 years old and I'm loading in production for a 4-day festival. If somebody would have told me I've been doing this, I said, you better quit smoking that stuff. It ain't good for you. And then the next year, I'm 76 years old, not loading in production, doing the first day of the 4-day run.
It keeps you young.
And this year I would have turned 77 at the festival.
Remarkable.
But it got canceled because of the virus. So
right.
It was kind of probably a good thing because you don't want to go to New York.
No.
in the midst of the coronavirus.
Not with that governor, for sure. Hey, Denny, let's get to this real quick. I want you to tell us the conversation that you had with DC Talk when they were trying to convince you to go out on the road with them.
Well, that's a kind of an interesting story. I got to back up a little bit.
Okay.
Amy Grant's people literally pursued me to go out as her production manager on the Age to Age tour.
Oh, wow.
And I wanted to do that with every ounce of my being.
Uh-huh.
But as Christians, we say we'll pray about something.
Right.
And a lot of times we really don't pray about it. We just kind of, mumble something and say, well, God must want me to do this.
Because you want to do it.
Well, I actually did pray about it. And as clear as I'm talking to you now, God said, well, you can do it, but here's what's going to cost you.
Oh, wow.
And when he showed me what it was going to cost me, I couldn't do it.
Oh.
I couldn't pay that price.
Wow.
He said, my daughter was a senior in high school, captain of the volleyball team, editor of the yearbook, director of the student play.
Wow.
And I was such a geeky dad that I didn't just go to her volleyball games. I went to her practices.
Right.
They had to hit over my blocks in practice. And I rode the team bus, and I was like the assistant coach almost.
Right.
I never was presumptuous enough to say that to the coach, but definitely helped out. And God says, you're going to go out with Amy Grant, and you're going to miss, and it was a large commitment of time. And he said, you're going to miss your daughter's entire senior year. Are you willing to do that?
Wow.
And I said, no, I'm not. So I had to call up Blanton and Harrell and say to them, I don't know that you're going to understand this, but I prayed about it and I can't do it.
That may be the only time they ever heard someone say no to them.
And I really honestly thought that was my one shot at big time.
Oh, wow.
And I just blew it out the door because, Nashville's a small town. It's like, things get around.
Right.
And so I figured, well, I just kind of shot myself in the foot. But I know that if I'd have gone ahead and done it, I would have not been good in my home life, and I would have probably really screwed up the Amy Grant tour. To be honest with you, something would have happened, and it would have not been good. So my daughter graduates from high school, moves out of the house, gets an apartment. 2 years later, or 3 years later, whatever it is. But anyway, I get a phone call from Dan Brock, who was DC Talk's manager at the time, Dan and Darlene Brock. And I had actually worked with DC Talk at the festival.
Sure.
Matter of fact, their very first festival appearance, they were on the road with the Garmo and Key, and they were the roadies for the Garmo and Key, and the Garmo and Key would let them do a 10-minute opening slot. and in their shows.
Probably instead of paying them.
Well, yeah, it probably was. Oh, I do know that Kevin got fired from whatever he was doing, and
And everybody who's surprised, raise your hand.
I think he was supposed to be the keyboard tech or something. I don't know.
He was probably just posing for pictures with people.
Exactly. Yeah. At any rate, I said, well, I turned down Amy Grant, and he goes, well, why are you even talking to me? I said, well, because times are different. Things have changed. I said, why don't you send me the itinerary and let me take a look at it? It was a 28-city tour. It was nothing. It was just, I go do 28 cities standing on my head.
It's like 8 weeks.
But it was their very, very first headline tour. And on the tour, DC Talk was a headliner, Newsboys, the Dynamic Twins, who were a rap act out of Southern California, and then two girls, Heather and Kirsten, who I never heard of before or since.
Right.
But they were out of Seattle. So he said, I asked DC Talk, who would you like as a tour manager? And they said, well, if you can get Denny Keitzman, that'd be the guy we want, because we know that this is going to be a circus.
Right.
So we're going to need a lion tamer. So I said, well, I'll tell you what, Dan. I said, you fly me to Nashville, and let's sit down and talk about it. So really, they flew me to Nashville. They had no idea that I was actually interviewing them.
Oh, that's great.
Instead of them interviewing me.
That's so awesome.
I met in the morning with Darlene Brock, and she kind of went over the, lay of the land with me. And then Toby joined us at lunch, and then it was Darlene and Toby in the afternoon. Now, I'm going to tell you something that's going to blow your mind. So I'm listening to Toby, and I'm saying, okay, Toby, we're going to blow into town on this tour if I do it. We're going to put up some, production, and you're going to do a show. What is the residue that you want to leave in that community when you pack up and go to the next city? I said, what is it you want to leave there? What are you trying to accomplish? And he said, well, I think I've got a creative way to share the gospel with a generation. I go, okay, that sounds good. I'm all about sharing the gospel. I said, however, and I looked him straight in the eye. I said, however, I have a feeling that you have an authority problem. And that just he just like Darlene Brock about crapped her pants and backed right up. And I said, I've worked with you enough to know that you got to have your hand in everything. And that's okay because it's your gig. But let me just tell you how I can work. We can do this one of three ways. You can give me a corral and say everything inside this corral is yours to make a decision on. Anything outside of this corral, you need to bring, to the either management or to me or whatever. Or I said, you can just trust me that I'm going to do my best to do whatever it is for you every day, the way you want it. I'll find out how you want it, and you're just going to have to trust me that it's going to be that way. Right. Or I can do this. I can bring every decision to you. Here's A, here's B, here's C, here's D. I would choose B because of this, and then I will stand back and let you pick which one of those you want to do, and then I'll go and execute it for you. I said, but, and I don't even want you to tell me now, I want you to think about this and pray about this and let me know which of those three things you want to do, but under no condition are you going to cut my legs off underneath me, right. Whichever one you choose. Right. You do, I guarantee you, I have a Platinum Amex in my wallet. I will be home before you can think about it. I don't need to go out running around the country with a bunch of kids.
Right.
And so he thought about it, and about 3 or 4 days later, I get a phone call and says, well, we'll do the corral.
Now, I'm sure him and Darlene talked about it after you left.
Well, yeah, actually it was. I got the phone call from Darlene. But, that, I think, endeared me to him. And one thing that's really neat about Toby McKeon is he surrounds himself with people who have strengths where he has weaknesses. If you look at his whole team, whether it's management or his band or whatever, he will surround himself with people who have strengths where he has weaknesses.
Right.
And obviously I had the strength to confront him on that particular issue, and I think it endeared me to him to some degree.
I'm sure it was good for him in the long run to be able to say, hey, I can trust Denny.
Yeah, and I told them artists lots of times their managers will talk them into doing an interview or doing a whatever, and they don't really want to do it. And so we'd have a day off, and he'd have somebody come over to do an interview with him, a radio station or a magazine or whatever. And he would tell me, he says, go down and tell him I'm sick. I said, no, you're sitting there in the bathtub. You just don't want to get out of you like that warm bathtub.
Right.
You don't want to go down there and deal with this. I'm not going to go down and lie for you.
Right.
If you want me to go down and tell them that you don't want to do it, I'll do that. But I'm not going to go down and tell them you're sick. It just ain't happening.
I always looked at you, Denny, as like their surrogate father. I love those guys individually, personally. I love all of them. But I always looked at you as like their surrogate father, one that kept them in line, that taught them, held them accountable, but was there to protect them.
Well, the fact that I was significantly older.
Yeah.
And rather large in stature.
Imposing.
Yeah, and had no problem at all calling a spade, you know. And there was a break in that 28-city tour where we had about 2 or 3 days off. I flew my wife out to be with me on that break. And I just told her, I said, I don't know if I can finish this because I'm either going to kill one of them or they're going to kill me. Really, I mean, there was really nothing not to like about any of them.
Right.
It's just that, you know, one person who shall remain nameless has, you know, I thought Toby had an authority problem. This other person made Toby look like he was backing up. I mean,
I'm sure it was like breaking a horse for the first time.
Yeah. I mean, and being told, no, we have to go now, or just, it's time to go to the stage, guys.
Right.
The show's got to start. Let's go. And, you know, nobody wanted to be the first one out of the dressing room.
Right.
I mean, and they would argue over the stupidest thing.
Of course. Well, that's what bands do.
They argued one time over who liked San Diego as their favorite city first.
Oh.
I mean, to the point that I thought the band was going to break up.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, or who had the squarest jaw, or who was sucking cheek on this photo shoot. I mean, to the point where I thought, well, there goes their career and probably mine.
Right.
Then they go make up and go to the mall and, you know, whatever.
I remember watching you when we were in Australia. I came up to your room and I said, dude, there was a developing situation in the lobby. I said, apparently several dozen fans have figured out which hotel we're staying in and they've converged on the lobby. And you like, okay. So we walked down there and I was just hanging back watching you deal with it. And we walked down and by that point, they had found whoever they were looking for, and they were taking pictures, and they were signing autographs, and they were doing all the thing. And you just walked in, saw them, and just turned around and went, they can deal with it. Because at that point, you knew the ship had sailed in terms of what you could expect crowd control-wise.
Oh, yeah. It would have been worse if I'd have intervened at that point.
Right. So you just let the fans have their moment and let the guys deal with it. It was funny.
What was really funny was meet and greets after the show.
Right.
Toby would put his finger right in my chest and pound on my chest. He said, you get me out of there in 20 minutes.
20 minutes.
And he's not joking. I mean, he's serious. Get me out of there in 20 minutes. I said, okay, fine. So I would watch my watch, and it would get to be, 10 minutes left. I'd say, okay, folks, we need to wrap this up. We got to go. We got a long drive tonight. Yada, yada, yada. And then 5 minutes left, and I'd say, okay, these are the last ones. You haven't got an autograph. You better get over here real quick, et cetera, et cetera. And then it would get to, okay, I'm sorry, but I've got to take them out of here because we've got a long. And Toby would look at me and he said, "No, I'm not leaving yet." and finally, I got that just if I don't mind being the bad guy,
right?
But you got to play. You got to play the game. If you're the one that's going to tell me to get you out of there in 20 minutes,
right? If
you want it to be 25, tell me it's 25, or tell me that you're going to. What game you're playing here. And finally, I just said, I'll tell you what, I'll be over here. You tell me when you want to leave.
The funny thing is, I just think he wanted to look like the hero for saying no to the production manager. We're going to stay as long as we have to.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really
Exactly.
funny. That is hilarious.
And if he'd have told me that on the way to the meet and greet,
Right.
I would have been totally fine with it.
Sure, of course. Dude, that is so great. That's funny.
Yeah,
All right. So before we finish up, Denny, I got a couple questions I want to run by you.
sure.
Were there any artists at the festivals that you loved seeing when they pulled in, that you loved to work with?
I loved anybody that had their crap together.
I knew you were going to say that. I had that written in my notes that you would say that. That is awesome.
If they did a good advance and then didn't change it when they got there and showed up on time and obeyed the time card girl, I was the best friend.
That's great.
But if you tell me one thing and then you show up and want to do something totally different, that ain't going to be end well. There is a mainstream hip-hop artist that had supposedly become a Christian, and he showed up he was booked at one of the Christian festivals that I did in Florida, in Daytona Beach. And on the phone, I'm advancing this with his manager, and he says, it's just going to be him. We're going to play the tracks, and that's it. And I said, okay, what format? This is back when you had to find out what format the tracks are going to be on. They're going to be ADAT, they're going to be a CD, or they're going to be a cassette tape. What is it? So that we can be prepared. So he tells me what it's going to be. Well, time for a sound check. And he says, oh, and by the way, he won't come to sound check.
Oh.
Okay, that's fine. If you're going to check his levels for him, that's fine with me. I don't care. But when I got to the sound check time, the manager comes up and says, "Wait, we're going to need some microphones."
Microphones for a choir?
Yeah. I said, "What choir?" He goes, "Well, he's got some friends here in town, and he invited their church choir over."
Oh, jeez.
I said, "Well, wait a second. That's a long ways from tracks and a microphone. How many microphones you talking about?" He said, "Well, I don't know. You're going to need to put up about 6 or 8. I said, "Okay." And then in walks the guy, and he has taken over the sound check. And so I'm standing down on the downstage edge of the stage with my clipboard, my stopwatch, and my arms folded across my chest,
Right.
giving him the stink eye by this time, because pretty much everything that they told me is, gone out the window.
Of course.
So finally, he walks over to me. He says, "Can I help you?" I said, "Yeah, I want your ass off my stage." Pretty big. I'm not going to name the artist, but it was a pretty big artist at the time.
I'm sure he remembers it.
Yeah, but anybody that has their act together, I would painstakingly pursue them on an advance. And then I would literally write down everything and then send them an email with, "This is what we discussed.
Right.
If you have any different recollection, you better let me know now." And literally sometimes print those things out and carry them in a notebook or have them available in my production office. One particular band who's quite well known literally lied to me right, left, and up and down and whatever. And I just went and got my thing and said, "Well, this is what we talked about." And says, I never said that. I said, "Well, there it is. There's my email. There's your email."
Nice.
And he had nothing to say after that.
Yeah, I can't argue with the facts, can you?
No.
Well, Denny, of all the bands I played with and artists and all the festivals we did together and the tours we did, I can tell you that everybody I ever worked with loved working with you.
I guess that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I'd rather have that than the opposite. And I know that Casting Crowns, which I did 6 tours with Casting Crowns too.
Yep.
In my career, but and I was literally hired just to train their person.
Right.
And 6 tours later, I said, "You're going to have to learn how to do this without me, because I can't keep doing this with you." And but I love Casting Crowns to death, to be honest with you. I mean, they are the real deal.
Right.
But they had a saying, "Well, this is a Denny day." And they'd come rolling into a festival, and if they'd have somebody new with them, they'd go, "Well, what the heck do you mean? What's a Denny day?"
Not the restaurant, boys and girls.
They said, "Well, you're going to find out."
That's right. By the end of those days, everyone knew why they were Denny days.
Yeah.
Okay, Denny, we're getting close to the end, so let's segue to this. A couple years ago, I posted something about the Miami Dolphins. You got a hold of me and said, "Oh my gosh, you've got to see my son." And you were telling me about how big of a fan your son is.
Oh, he's a huge Dolphins fan.
Tell everybody about your son and what he does with the Dolphins.
Well, I don't exactly remember what I told you, but he's a fanatic on selfies. And so he's had his picture taken with Marino, with Shula, with literally everybody. And he had he called it an action figure. Everybody else called it a doll. But it was Dan Marino in uniform. And he would literally carry that Dan Marino action figure around all over the country and put it in places and get photographs to where it would look like Dan Marino was climbing up the Empire State Building or something.
Right.
I mean, he is famous for dressing up. They'll put him on a Jumbotron. I went to a Dolphins game with him here in Nashville. We had to go start tailgating at 7 o'clock in the morning, complete with sound system and whatever. And he had a group of Dolphin fans that he knew, and he invited them all over to come over where we're tailgating. And
so he's a legendary Dolphins
oh,
fan,
my gosh.
Not just a casual Dolphins fan.
Yeah.
Well, someday I hope to meet him. I'd love to meet him with you and go to lunch and talk Dan Marino. I have about $10,000 in Dan Marino football cards.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, you need to look him up on Facebook.
I will, for sure.
His name is Griffin Van Nest. It's his mother's maiden name. Yeah, you need to look him up. I mean, he rides in the Dolphin Cancer Challenge. He rides a bicycle 50, 60 miles a day.
Oh,
I mean, he is hardcore into these long bicycle treks. He has raised all kinds of money for cancer research through the Dolphins Cancer Challenge.
That's fantastic, dude. Well, I will definitely check him out, and hopefully someday I'll get a chance to meet him, and it'd be cool to sit down with the three of us and have dinner one night, talk about the Dolphins and Dan Marino, reminisce back when they were actually good as opposed to how good they are now. But anyways, so I want to say for the record, Denny, that I have reached out to you several times over the years, asked you your opinion on stuff, got your advice on things that came up here and there, because I value who you are and the wisdom that you live your life by. And I even got a hold of you a year or two ago when this guy was trying to hire my daughter to do web work for him. And I reached out to you because I figured when I heard his name, I figured, well, if he's really in Christian music like he tells her he is, Denny will know who he is. And I reached out to you for that too. So I appreciate all of the times that we've gotten to hang out, have dinner, and catch up and all that stuff. So I really hope we can do this again. There's so much stuff I didn't even get to today.
Well, I'd love it. I'd love it.
Now, the next time I see you, we'll get Thai food for lunch.
There you go. And Thai food for dinner.
And or we could get you a perfect steak.
Let me just say this real quick in closing. Whenever I had a day off on the road, I would walk up to the desk clerk at the hotel and I would say, I'm not an attorney, but if I was an attorney in your town and I just won the biggest case of my entire life, where would I be eating a steak tonight? and don't tell me, Texas Roadhouse or something like that.
Right.
I want some, cigar smoky, wood paneled place where rich people go. And I would go out by myself on off days, and I ate some amazing steaks. I can tell you that.
Oh, I bet. What was the best steak you ever had?
Well,
or the most memorable?
The most memorable was at the Hereford House in Kansas City. I used to do a festival in Kansas City. I'd fly into Kansas City, rent a car. I'd drive right to the Hereford House.
That's awesome.
and I would order their filet mignon.
Nice.
Just absolutely incredible.
Cool.
Unfortunately, the Hereford House caught fire and burned down a few years ago.
Oh, no.
But it was one of these just, places that were just absolutely incredible. I kind of like cooking my own steaks now.
Yeah.
To be honest with
well,
you.
Thai food for dinner it is, my friend. So, dude, I want to say thanks. Thank you for always making us look good, getting us all in the right places at the right times. You are truly, truly a jewel in God's crown and one of my all-time favorite people. Thank you so much, Denny.
Well, I appreciate that, John. I really do. And you're not too bad yourself either. How about that?
Well, thanks, man. All right, ladies and gentlemen, my good friend, the one and only Denny Keitzman. Thank you, Denny.
You're welcome, sir. Thank you.
Hey Rockstar provides digital marketing software and services for your church to generate more interest, create more exposure, and reach more people. Let Hey Rockstar amplify the awesomeness of your ministry. And, as always, Hey Rockstar is a proud sponsor of the Stage Right with John Thorne podcast.
Thank you, Hey Rockstar. Thank you, Denny Keitzman, and my thanks to you for listening. My guest next week, Ron Rockstar, Montreal journalist and pop culture czar. Have a fantastic week.